Imagine it's 865 AD. Just try and picture it. A gray, churning sea, and then out of the mist, shapes. Long ships, hundreds of them. Not just a raiding party this time, but a massive fleet heading straight for England.
Europe had seen Viking raids before, of course. Swift, brutal attacks.
Exactly. But what arrived in 865, this was different. Something new. A force on a scale never seen before, and with a completely different goal. Chroniclers actually called it the Great Heathen Army.
A chilling name.
It really is. So for this deep dive, we're going to get into the story of this huge invasion. We want to understand, the sheer scale of it, who was leading it, the conquest itself, and really how it changed England forever.
And I think what's really key here, right from the start, is that this wasn't just more raiding. It was a strategic shift. A huge one.
How so?
Well, they moved from these quick strikes to basically sustained military occupation. And that makes us look beyond just, plunder. We have to see the strategic ambition driving them. It's a pivotal moment.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're drawing on a couple of sources here. A transcript from a video documentary called The Great Heathen Army, England's Viking Transformation, which is really insightful. And we've also got an academic overview, kind of a broader look from a Wikipedia article on Viking raid warfare and tactics. Together, they should give us a pretty good picture.
Sounds good.
So, let's set the scene. Autumn 865 AD, the coast of East Anglia. Suddenly this armada appears, not just a few ships.
No, we're talking thousands of warriors. This wasn't a local group. It was a coalition, really. Norsemen from Denmark, Norway, maybe even Sweden, all coming together, a unified force.
It must have been terrifying and completely unexpected on this scale.
Absolutely. Because the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, they were used to the hit-and-run stuff, right? Seasonal raids along the coast or up rivers.
Yeah.
This already was different. It was built for occupation, for staying. And England was, utterly unprepared for that kind of sustained, centralized threat.
It was a whole new ball game.
Completely. It showed a shift in Viking thinking from just raiders to something more like, proto-state builders almost.
And their goal wasn't subtle, was it?
Not at all. It was clear.
Yeah.
Conquest. Not just loot this time. Land. Power.
So they land in East Anglia. What happens next? They moved fast, didn't they?
Incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Terrifyingly efficient, you could say. They pushed north, captured Northumbria pretty quickly.
And York became their main base.
Exactly. York was strategic. It gave them a solid stronghold, a center of operations in the north.
And from
York, they consolidated, then turned their attention back south. East Anglia was next. That's where they defeated King Edmund.
Ah, the famous martyr king.
Yes, his death was particularly brutal, apparently. Led to him becoming St. Edmund later on. After East Anglia, they marched into Mercia, the big central kingdom.
And just dismantled it.
Pretty much. Systematically took it apart. They had this really effective strategy.
The winter camps.
Right. They'd find a good spot, maybe a monastery, maybe a royal estate after the harvest, fortify it, and just stay for the winter.
Smart. Using the enemy's resources.
And their downtime. Then comes spring, they were rested, supplied, and ready to launch devastating campaigns from these fortified hubs.
Which put massive pressure on the kingdoms. Pay up or be destroyed.
Precisely. That's the Danegeld. Huge sums of silver, paid essentially as protection money.
But it didn't really solve the problem, did it?
Well, that's the fascinating part. In the short term, maybe it got some peace. But often, that wealth just went straight back into funding more Viking ships, recruiting more warriors.
So the Anglo-Saxons were basically funding their own destruction.
In a way, yes. It shows the Vikings weren't just fighters. They had this strategic understanding, this ability to sustain pressure over years. They weren't just robbing kingdoms, they were breaking them, shattering the whole political map.
And who was leading this incredible force? We hear names like Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson.
Yes, legendary figures. Often said to be sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, though that's debated.
But definitely the key leaders here.
Absolutely. Yes. Ivar, especially in the early stages, seemed to have been the mastermind. Known for his cunning, his ruthlessness, his strategic genius, really. He orchestrated a lot of the initial successes.
And Halfdan.
Halfdan took over a large part of the army later on. He's the one who really focused on Northumbria, conquering it and actually establishing a permanent Viking kingdom there. That's a crucial shift from raiding to ruling.
So this is where it gets really interesting for me. These leaders, Ivar and Halfdan, they weren't just typical Viking chieftains out for a quick raid, were they?
No, not at all. That's the key distinction.
It seemed more like Well, aspiring kings,
Yeah.
empire builders almost.
Exactly. Their personal ambitions, combined with their ability to coordinate this huge, diverse army, that's what transformed the whole nature of the Viking threat in England. It became something much bigger, much more dangerous.
So let's dig into that. How did they pull it off? England had established kingdoms, presumably larger populations. What gave the Vikings such an edge?
Well, it wasn't just numbers or brute force. A lot of it comes down to their culture. It was deeply, intrinsically tied to war.
In what way?
You have the whole warrior ethos, the connection to gods like Odin, the promise of Valhalla for a heroic death in battle. That fosters a certain fearlessness.
Right.
And training started young. Boys learned to fight within their clans, building intense loyalty. Plus, personal reputation, honor, these were everything. An insult wasn't just words. It could legally justify violence.
Wow.
Combine that with a belief that your time of death is already decided by fate. Well, it focuses the mind, doesn't it? You strive for success and the fame that comes with it, or you die trying. There wasn't much room for half measures.
So there's the cultural drive, but there were practical reasons too, right? Loot, political power.
Oh, absolutely. Valhalla is one thing, but silver is silver. Expeditions brought back wealth, and wealth meant influence, status, the ability to attract more followers. Think of someone like Olaf Tryggvason use his raiding profits to make a bid for kingship back in Norway.
And that explains why churches and monasteries were such frequent targets.
Precisely. They weren't just undefended. They were treasure houses.
Right.
Relics, gold, silver, fine textiles, illuminated manuscripts like the Codex Aureus.
Which was actually stolen and ransomed back.
Exactly. It shows their pragmatism alongside the brutality. If something was valuable, they'd take it.
Okay, so culture and motivation are key. What about their technology? The longships, obviously.
Huge factor. Their shipbuilding was, frankly, technologically superior for their needs. The longships were fast, incredibly fast for the time.
And the shallow draft was crucial, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical. About a meter deep, roughly. That meant they didn't need harbors. They could land right on beaches.
Or sail way up rivers.
Way up rivers. Thames and Francia, Elbs in Germany. Deep into enemy territory, launching surprise attacks where nobody expected them. The Gokstad ship gives us a great idea of how they were built sleek, flexible, fast.
That speed made the classic hit and run so effective. I read that even Charlemagne couldn't catch them sometimes.
It's true. He'd hear about a raid, mobilize his forces, but by the time they got there, poof, Vikings gone. Vanished back to sea.
But the Great Heathen Army wasn't just hit and run. You said they brought a more organized approach.
Right. While earlier raids might have resembled, say, special forces operations, small units, specific targets this army fought, pitched battles. They were organized.
How so? What kind of tactics?
Well, they used ambushes very effectively. On the battlefield, they favored things like the wedge formation, pushing their best warriors right at the tip to break enemy lines. Lots of spear throwing before closing in.
Good old hand-to-hand combat.
They excelled at it. And shield walls, forming a solid barrier of interlocking shields. Very tough to break. But they weren't reckless fanatics either.
No.
No, they understood tactical retreats. If a battle was going badly, they'd pull back, regroup. Better than losing the whole force. Pragmatic.
And they liked unconventional tactics too, didn't they? No warning, just attack.
Definitely. Deceit, stealth, ruthlessness.
You.
They rarely agreed on a time and place for battle, like some other cultures did. Surprise was a weapon.
And then you have the berserkers.
Ah, yes. The legends. Warriors fighting in a frenzy, maybe fueled by something, maybe just battle rage. Hard to separate myth from reality.
But the idea of them must have been terrifying.
Immensely. Especially to Christian opponents, who saw it as something demonic. It was psychological warfare, adding to their fearsome reputation.
You mentioned overwintering earlier. Can we expand on that? How did that work?
Sure. It was basically a form of short-term occupation. After the harvest season, when campaigning usually stopped for armies like the Franks.
Because moving supplies was harder in winter.
Exactly. The Vikings would seize a monastery or a town, maybe a royal estate somewhere, with supplies already gathered. They'd fortify it and use it as a base throughout the winter.
Safe and sound while everyone else is hunkered down.
Pretty much. And it allowed them to launch raids deeper inland, hitting targets that were previously safe. Once they were dug in and supplied, dislodging them before spring was incredibly difficult. A massive strategic advantage.
Let's talk weapons. What were they actually fighting with?
The spear was king, by far the most common weapon, cheap to make, effective, and crucially, it gave them reach.
Keeping enemies at a distance.
Right. Then you had bows and arrows, often made from yew or ash, Archers would usually be behind the main spear line.
And axes, the iconic Viking axe.
Yep, axes were common too. Often adapted from woodcutting tools, so readily available. Lighter than you might think, fast, good for hooking shields or limbs. Some famous ones even had names, like King Magnus's axe, Hel.
Hell, nice name for an axe.
Indeed, swords were more of an elite weapon. Expensive to make, often pattern welded for strength and flexibility. Highly prized, sometimes passed down through generations. They actually admired Frankish swords for their quality.
So spears, axes, some swords. What about defense?
Shields were standard, usually round, made of wood, maybe about a meter across. Iron boss in the center to protect the hand, often covered in leather to stop them splintering too easily.
And armor, chainmail.
Chainmail existed, yes, but it was very expensive. Really only affordable for the wealthiest warriors or chieftains. You don't find it commonly in graves.
Okay, and the big one, helmets. Did they have horns?
The eternal question. The simple answer is no. There's absolutely zero evidence, archaeological or historical, that Viking battle helmets had horns.
Really? None at all?
None for battle. If horned helmets existed, they were likely purely ceremonial, maybe religious. Definitely not something you'd wear charging into a shield wall. That image is mostly from 19th century opera costumes.
Right. Good to clear that up. So this incredibly effective, culturally driven, well-equipped, and strategically savvy force is rolling over kingdom after kingdom, but not Wessex.
Not Wessex. That's where King Alfred comes in. Alfred the Great. He managed to hold the line.
But it wasn't easy for him, was it? He had major setbacks initially.
Oh, huge setbacks. At one point, the Vikings had pushed him back so far, he was literally hiding out in the marshes of Athelney in Somerset. A low point for Wessex, absolutely.
So how did he turn it around?
Alfred was smart. He was adaptable. He didn't just stick to old Anglo-Saxon ways. He learned from the Vikings.
How?
He reorganized his army, making it more responsive. Crucially, he started building a network of fortified towns and burhs across Wessex. Defensive strongpoints.
Like the Vikings' winter camps, but for defense.
In a way, yes. Creating safe havens and bases for his own forces. He even seems to have adopted some Viking tactics himself. He adapted to the threat.
And it worked.
Eventually, yes, his persistence paid off. The big turning point was the Battle of Edington in 878 AD.
A decisive victory for Alfred.
Hugely significant. If you connect it to the bigger picture, Edington didn't magically end the Viking presence, but it stopped their momentum against Wessex. It marked the start of an Anglo-Saxon recovery.
And laid the groundwork for unifying England later.
Absolutely. It secured Wessex. And from that secure base, Alfred and his successors could eventually push back and begin to forge a single English kingdom. It really shows what determined leadership can do against seemingly overwhelming odds.
So after Edington, Alfred makes a treaty, right, with the Viking leader Guthrum?
Yes. The Treaty of Wedmore, often called. This formally established what we now call the Danelaw.
Which was?
Basically a large chunk of eastern and northern England where Norse law, Norse customs, held sway. The Vikings were officially allowed to settle and rule there.
So the warriors became settlers?
Many did, yes. They put down their swords, picked up plows, became farmers, traders, integrated into the landscape.
And we see evidence of this.
Oh, yes. Archaeology is key here. We find distinctively Scandinavian burial practices, artifacts, settlement patterns, place names, and mass graves like the famous one at Repton in Derbyshire.
Repton. What was found there?
A huge burial site, potentially linked to the Great Army, overwintering there in 873-874. Hundreds of individuals, many showing signs of violent death, buried alongside Viking grave goods. It strongly suggests a large part of the army was present.
Which brings us to a bit of a mystery, doesn't it? What actually happened to the entire Great Heathen Army in the end? Did they all just settle in the Danelaw?
That's the million-dollar question, really. Did they all settle? Did some go back to Scandinavia? Did others move on to raid elsewhere, like Francia? Did they just
assimilate?
We don't definitively know.
The precise fate, the final dispersal of that entire massive force, it's still elusive. We have pieces of the puzzle like Repton, like the Danelaw settlement, but the complete picture, scholars still debate it. Given its sheer size, figuring out where everyone went is tough.
So, summing up then, what's the big takeaway here? The Great Heathen Army wasn't just another raid.
Far from it. It was genuinely transformative for England.
A destructive force, obviously. Yeah. Undeniably. It shattered the old Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, caused immense suffering and upheaval. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, they were never really the same again.
But paradoxically,
Paradoxically, that very pressure forced Wessex, under Alfred, to consolidate, to innovate, to become stronger. And that strength became the foundation for a unified England, something that probably wouldn't have happened, or certainly not in the same way, without the Viking catalyst.
So their campaigns, brutal as they were, effective as they were, left this lasting legacy.
Absolutely. You see it in place names ending in Frinkby or Lithorpe. You hear echoes in the English language. And you have this enduring memory of a time when this incredible force swept down from the north and fundamentally reshaped a nation.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about ambition, adaptation, both from the invaders and the defenders, that resilience when cultures clash under immense pressure. What does this whole saga tell us, really, about how societies cope, how they change when faced with something that massive, that overwhelming, something to ponder?